My guest today on Creative, Inspired, Happy is Katherine Center, New York Times bestselling author and one of the reigning queens of hopeful, feel-good fiction. Her latest novel, The Love Haters, is out now. Today, we talk about finding inspiration, which Katherine describes as catching butterflies, discovering your place and mission in writing, a.k.a. what kind of author do you want to be, maintaining a pace of publishing one book a year, her trick for writing deep characters, balancing normal life as a mom with being a professional writer, what does long-term success look like for a novelist, and so much more. Creative, Inspired, Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with incredibly successful authors and others in the book world to help you build a fulfilling career and live a more creative, inspired, and happy life. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get publishing insights, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Katherine. Welcome to Creative, Inspired, Happy. I'm so thrilled to have you here today on your release day. How are you feeling?
Yay! I'm so excited. Yeah, I'm very excited about this book. So this is like a birthday, or better. It's better than a birthday.
I feel like every year, right before summer, we get a little present from you, and The Love Haters is your latest one. I can't wait for everyone to hear all about it. But before we get into the book, I want to talk about you as a writer and your journey, because this is, I think, your 14th book. I lost track. I was trying to count on your website, and I like after you get over 10, it's a lot. And you've been written in anthologies. Tell us how you got started with writing. How did you discover your love for it?
Okay. I have also lost count of my books, so we can just make up a number. I have no idea. I'm definitely not a math person. I got started writing when I was in the 6th grade. So it's been a long time. It's been many decades now. And I started writing because I was very miserable in the 6th grade, and I was very dorky and very awkward, and basically like every affliction that a 6th grade girl can have, like I had them all. And I was very sort of heartbroken that everything was so bad, like I knew it was bad, like I just kind of walked around that whole year, just like hunched over an apology. Like, I'm sorry. Like, like I too wish this were not happening. And, but I was very lucky that year because I had 2 best friends who were also awkward and also miserable. And we got this idea that we should write fan fiction about the 1980s boy band Duran Duran. And so we did. We each took a little spiral notebook and we each invented a story, and we cast ourselves as the main characters of our stories. And then we cast each other as secondary characters in the stories. And then we would suffer through the school week as only 6th grade girls can suffer. And then on the weekends, we would get together and have sleepovers, and we'd put on our PJs and pile into somebody's bed and open up our little novels and read them to each other in installments.
Oh my gosh, I love this. This is the greatest origin story.
It is so good. My mom is always like, when are you going to stop talking about Duran Duran? And I'm like, never. I will never stop talking about it. But yeah, it was so fun, right? So 6th grade was misery, but writing the novels was bliss. We just made our own hope, right? We made our own fun. We made our own feeling of something to look forward to. And we kind of, as bad as those novels truly were, and I still have mine in a storage tub in my attic, and my older sister has explicit instructions that if I'm ever hit by a bus, her number one job is to find it and burn it before it ever sees the light of day. They're very bad novels. But it was also kind of genius. We sort of rescued ourselves, and we found a way of generating the sort of love and hope that we needed at that age. And it wound up being one of the best things that's ever happened. And it was my first ever sort of taste of the very, very sweet nectar of fiction and how stories can change your life. So yeah, I've been kind of addicted to it all ever since then. I really wanted to be a writer from the age of 12, and that is the reason why.
So talk a little bit more about that magic of stories. And have you always written love stories, or what draws you to that?
Well, that's a great question. Okay, the Duran Duran story was definitely a love story. Like, it started out as a love story. I was writing a romance novel. I didn't even know what a romance novel was, but definitely in my Duran Duran story, I meet the band members by chance. And then, in very short order, all five of them fall in love with me. And then that is the whole plot of the novel. I have to decide which world famous rocker, to marry. So I definitely started with love stories, and then once I knew I wanted to be a writer, I took it very seriously, right? And I think this actually happens to a lot of kids who either want to be writers or who just love reading and love sort of English class. And I don't want to say that high school English like sucked the joy out of it for me, but in a way it did, because it sort of became work after that. Like, I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't want to be a hack writer. I wanted to be a good writer. And so I shifted gears from sort of the early joy of it to like the work of it, right? And like taking myself seriously and life seriously. And I was hard on myself, and I read a lot of Kafka and Camus, and it just kind of went to a place where it was a lot less fun. And then I went to college, to Vassar College, and did a lot of writing there. And that's a pretty serious kind of place. And then I came back and went to graduate school and got a master's in creative writing, and at the University of Houston's creative writing program, which is apparently #1 in the country right now for writing programs. And that was a very serious place. And I, like, I really treated it like work. And then really ever since then, my writing life has been this very slow, very sort of joyful process of de-snobification, of sort of letting go of a lot of the sort of literary ideas that I absorbed without really questioning them about what makes a story like culturally valuable, or like personally valuable, or any kind of valuable, like what makes a good story. When I was younger, I thought that only literary stories were the ones that had value for a while. And then I kind of went through this long process of questioning that and coming back to that early joy, giving myself permission to read for fun, and to read for bliss, and to read for love, and to read for enjoyment. And that whole process of doing that made it made the process of getting better as a writer a lot more fun, but also made me better as a writer. Because I actually think, and I could go all day on this, we could do a whole college seminar, but I actually really think that the only way to get better at anything is to pay attention to what you love. Right? Like, you're never going to get better at something by criticizing or by staring at all the things you hate about that thing, or all the things that are going wrong with that thing. You have to like notice what you love and pay attention to it. So giving myself permission to kind of acknowledge that, like, of all the different kind of stories in the entire world, and that there's just endless stories in the world, my favorite stories are love stories. Those are the most uplifting, the most blissful, the most soothing, the most nourishing to me, right? And to just kind of, I think we all sort of need to pay attention to the stories that we love, right? The stories that call to us, whether that's, mysteries or horror stories or adventure, whatever it is that like speaks to you, is calling to you for a very particular reason, that is trying to answer questions for you in your life that you might not even know you need to ask, because stories just have this way of like bypassing the head and going right down to the heart.
Yes.
So so paying attention to like not what you think you ought to read, or like what you think your high school English teacher would want you to read, but just to like what it is that you are drawn to, is a way of like taking care of yourself and nurturing yourself, right? And helping yourself work through questions that are really important for sort of growing and thriving as a human. So for me, that genre, the one that pulls to me, the kind of the only one I'm really interested in anymore, is love stories. And, there's a particular kind of magic that they have that I can just like never get enough of, but I think it's different for everybody. But I do think part of my like mission as a like writer and as a person who thinks about stories like literally all the time, is to try to give other people who have maybe been shamed away from reading love stories or who have been sort of made to feel silly for liking love stories, to give those people permission to like dive in, because I think that love is good for you. This is my battle cry. It's good for you. And reading love stories makes us better at love, which of course makes us better at life. So I'm a real like evangelist for love stories. Like I am out there trying to get everybody to, you don't have to read them. I'm not going to make my husband like put down that spy novel he's got in his hands. But if you're curious about it and you want to read it, like I'm just like, come on in, the water's fine. Come over to the fun side.
You are definitely my kind of person. I feel like the optimism in your heart, this eternal hope that I think goes through love stories. And I love this as a mission as a writer. Not only
Yes.
are you allowing yourself to write what you enjoy, and walking away from, like no judgment to what other people enjoy, like you said, but being okay with what you like and saying like, hey, this is beautiful. And also I think that sometimes genre fiction, it's not given as much credit for the skill that's involved in writing an incredible story, and you are so masterful at that. I want to get into that as well later because I have some questions for you about how you write your characters and all that. But first, I have a question from our community. So Creative Inspired Happy is not just a podcast, we're also an online community of readers and writers. And before every show, I let people know, hey, this is who I'm recording with next. So if you have any questions, Effie has a couple questions for you. So we'll give you one right now, maybe one later. So Effie wants to know, where do you get your inspiration for your stories?
Oh man. I am always looking for stories that are uplifting. I feel like I have an antenna for that. And like if I hear about something that happened to somebody, or if I read about something, in the news, or if I dream something, um, I'm not really going to pay attention to it if it's, about a serial killer or whatever, like that's not going to be something that's going to pull to me. But what I do find myself looking for are stories about people doing good things, stories about people bouncing back from hardship, stories about people being unexpectedly kind or doing altruistic things. I mean, The Love Haters, my new book is about, it's really got a whole theme about heroes and why they do the sort of courageous, amazing things that they do. And I'm always sort of looking for that because I love that feeling of being uplifted. There's actually a psychological term for it. And it's called, oh my God, what's it called? Moral elevation.
Oh, interesting.
This term was invented by a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. And it's basically how, like, when you witness another person doing something altruistic or kind or courageous, it's sort of a contagious feeling and it makes you want to do those things too. Like it makes you want to be a better person. Seeing other people being good people makes you want to be a better person. And I love that idea. And I'm always kind of about wanting to create more goodness in the world. I mean, I think about that a lot. Like, I think we could all like use a lot more goodness and love and kindness and altruism. So yeah, what I will just say in answer to that question is that I really do think that like ideas and inspiration, it's almost like they're just butterflies and they're just flying around in the world. And like, if you're a writer or an artist, like if you're interested in whatever you're interested in, your job is to have like a little butterfly net and to like catch the ones that are going to be helpful to you, right? That are going to help you write about or do whatever it is you're trying to do. So, there are lots of times when those butterflies just come and go and I don't have time to catch them. But then there are other times when I'm starting a new book and I'm looking around where I'm like, ooh, that's a good one. And then I grab them and start working them in.
Amazing. Okay, let's talk about the newest butterfly, The Love Haters. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, actually, so this story, it's about a woman video producer who has to make a promotional video about the Coast Guard. And she has to film this U.S. Coast Guard rescue swimmer named Hutch. And the rescue swimmers are like the guys who like jump out of helicopters like into the ocean and like rescue people who are like, whose boats have sunk. And then they kind of hook them onto wires and hoist them back up into the helicopter. So it's incredibly, right? It's incredibly courageous, and it's just kind of them against the ocean, right? Rescuing people. And I didn't know very much about that job until I started working on this story. But my husband and I were talking about the story early on, and he knows that I love courage and, kindness and good deeds. And so he was like, if you're interested in altruism, you should look at the Coast Guard. And then he actually sent me a couple of videos of like these guys, like literally like with their fins on, in their wetsuits, like jumping out of helicopters and rescuing people in these incredibly dramatic situations. And I was like, okay, like this is really inspiring. So I had to learn a lot about the Coast Guard to sort of be able to write about it. I'm a big fan of research. I always want the stories that I'm writing to feel as real as I can possibly make them. And I don't always get everything 100%, but I really, really try. I take it very seriously. So I did a ton of research. I got in touch with the Coast Guard, their Office of, I guess, Television and Motion Pictures or something was the name of the office. And they hooked me up with this station in Houston that's called Air Station Houston. It's down near NASA. I live in Houston, so it was nearby. And they very kindly let me come and hang out at the station and interview a bunch of rescue swimmers and meet a bunch of pilots and just talk to all kinds of folks who worked there about life in the Coast Guard. And I actually got to ride up in a helicopter, which I had never done in my whole life.
Cool. Wow.
It was. Then it was kind of terrifying, but it was amazing. And they actually strapped me into a gunner's belt and then opened up the side of the helicopter while we were hovering over Kima Bay, like, over the water. And the flight mechanic was like, you can just lean out, go full Kate Winslet, just like lean out and look over the water. And I was like, you know what? I'm good. I'm gonna hang back a little bit. But anyway, so I got to learn a lot about that. And of course, when you go and do research, I mean, to keep going with the butterflies idea, there's butterflies everywhere. Like that's where a lot of the ideas come from, is like sort of immersing yourself in that world, learning about that world, seeing how things happen. It gives you all kinds of ideas. So actually the grand finale of the book, came from
without spoiling anything.
Came from visiting. And I literally sat down at a conference table with one of the rescue swimmers and I said, could this happen? And he was like, it could definitely happen. And I was like, could you walk me through, like, if this were happening to you, what would you do? So yeah, I mean, it really is so helpful to go and do that. So yeah, that's my new butterfly.
That's so exciting. Okay. Tell me a little bit about the characters. And what I really want to know is, you're so good at writing deep characters. And I can tell that part of that is because of this research that you do into their backgrounds, right? Like, I mean, I read The Bodyguard, it was like 2022, I think it came out. And like Hannah and Jack, they're still in my heads and they felt so real. And I'm curious, it doesn't feel like you're going through a checklist of like, okay, I need to cover this character trait and this character trait. Do you have a trick, or what is your process for making them feel like real 3-dimensional human beings?
Well, that's such a great question. I guess I don't really have a trick, but I will say that I never ever start writing until I know what it is that at least the two main characters, and often a lot of the sort of side characters as well, what it is that they're struggling with. Because I see stories as very much always kind of about human transformation, right? Like, what is the point of me telling you this story? It's about seeing these two people, throwing them into this situation, whatever it is, and then seeing how the situation forces them to grow and change. And for me, that's always kind of the most interesting part. The most fun part is the love story, but the most interesting part is about how people sort of face their fears, right? Learn how to be brave, go through hard things that they would never have thought they could handle. I love seeing people kind of cope and grapple and get better at life. And I don't think that's a spoiler. Like, yeah, in all of my books, people get better at life. Like that's what they're for. And I think seeing other people get better helps us get better too. I think that's part of the magic of reading fiction, is that we learn by watching. And so we get to kind of go through the story sort of with them and as them, and then we come out on the other side, and whatever wisdom they're pulling out of that experience, we get to have it too. It's like this cheat for human life. So yeah, I love seeing that happen. And so I always make sure that each of my characters, each of my big characters has something that he or she kind of needs to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of making sure that the story forces them into situations where they have to confront that thing and rethink it. And so that kind of guides how the plot goes, and it guides a lot of the scenes that happen. And that's really it. After that, I would say there is no checklist. It's just about getting the right people into the right situation and then seeing whatever drama kind of results from that. I think if you I always feel like some stories have like a big fire in their belly that kind of lights everything else up. And finding that fire to me is really about the characters in the situation and how those two things sort of have chemistry. So I always think of it like that feeling when you try to like push the wrong sides of a magnet together.
Yes.
And there's that tension, that resistance, like your characters against each other and against the situation that they're in need to have that kind of invisible energy. And if you have that, like I never ever start until I know I've got that. Because if you start before you have it, you'll never find it later. Like it has to be there from the ground floor, and it has to be sort of driving everything that's happening in the story. But once you have that, and once it's good, like you've got all the right pieces in the mix, for me anyway, then the story just starts happening,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just
like,
starts taking off.
It just takes off. And then it's really less about pushing the story forward than about watching the story and following it and seeing where it goes.
Okay,
right?
so what is your tension in the love haters? How did you start? Or if it's easier to talk about the characters, what was their struggle that brought them to find that tension?
Okay, so there's a bunch of them. But one of the big things is that so Katie, her job is kind of in danger. She's the main character, and she gets this opportunity to go to Key West and film this video of this rescue swimmer. But Katie doesn't know how to swim. And so she kind of lies about it right at the start, because there's this whole thing in her job that, you just say yes and figure it out. Right. And so she's like, I'll figure it out. I can learn how to dog paddle. How hard can that be? So that tension starts from the start. She puts herself in a situation that she's really not qualified to be in. And she also just so happens to have some things she needs to rethink about how kind she is to her own self and her own body. So she is a person who has not owned a bathing suit since middle school, but the situation forces her to get one, right? And to go and to take swim lessons and to spend a lot of time in the water. And so she kind of has to confront her demons. And this is one of my favorite parts of the story. She goes on this sort of enemies to lovers journey with her own self. Right?
Oh, gosh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's that's really fun to watch. So that's one of my favorite arcs in the story. And then Hutch, who is the other sort of lead in the story and the love interest for Katie, he is kind of a hero, but he's got a lot of things in his past that he needs to sort of rethink and overcome. And it's her brother. It's Hutch's brother, Cole, who sort of creates the whole situation that throws them together. And Cole and Hutch do not get along. So this situation forces him to confront his brother and their past together and a lot of family stuff. So it's like the situation, the plot is driving the character growth, but the characters and their decisions are driving the plot. So it becomes this sort of thing that becomes very organic. And once those people are real to you as a writer, they just kind of take the wheel and start doing it. I always feel like when I'm reading other stories, I can often feel when the outline is like very present in the story. Like I can feel it sometimes when I'm like bumping up against somebody's outline. And I just always love it so much more when the characters take over and when the writing's really going and the writers just take in dictation, just kind of watching it happen.
This is actually my question for you. How are you so prolific? And I wonder if it's because, because at first you were talking about research and I thought, how can you possibly, on average, like a book a year now? How can you do that if you have to research so deeply? But then once you get to know your characters, once the story gets going, what is your process like for making sure that these books come out as often as they do?
Yeah. So the whole process of writing a book takes about a year. roughly. And so, as soon as I'm done with one, I just kind of start up with the next one. And I do about 3 months of research. And that means visiting, fire stations. I wrote a book called Things You Save in a Fire. And I went to like 4 different fire stations around Houston and talked to all the firefighters and asked them all these questions about their lives. I watch documentaries, I read books, I study things, I visit locations, right? I just I literally call up strangers and ask them if they'll sit down and talk to me about some experience that they've had, which I'm a little bit shy in that situation, but I push myself to do it anyway, because I know that the story is going to be so much better when I've kind of come at it from that angle, from that inside angle. So I take all of that really, really seriously, and I fill notebook after notebook after notebook of notes and quotes and stuff. And I spent about 3 months doing that kind of in the fall. And then somewhere around maybe like early November, it's time to start writing. And then what I kind of do is I just take all that research and I kind of set it over to the side and I kind of let it go. I've sort of learned everything that I can learn, and now it's just time to jump in and write the story and hope for the best. And so then I spend about the next 6 months, 5 or 6 months, writing that first draft. And I have a way of doing it that's kind of maybe different from a lot of other people. And it sort of evolved out of having kids, because I, have 2 kids that are mostly grown now. But when they were little, I just found that I couldn't write if they were like, not just in the house, but like in the city with me, like just knowing that somebody might need me at some point. I always think of like writing a novel as like you have to walk out to the end of a long dock and get into a rowboat and like row out into the deep ocean of your imagination. But if your kids are on the shore, it's very hard to like make that choice. So for me, one of the ways that I would kind of disconnect from like mom life and all the worries and attention that requires was to go out of town. I would just leave town. I would find somebody who had a vacation home, or, somebody who would let me go dog sit, or, just get out of town. And so, so that became my system, and it's actually a great system. There are writers who will tell you have to write every day. There are writing books that say, it's a job, put your butt in the seat, do it every day, make a habit out of it. I don't do it that way at all. I will go out of town for like 4 or 5 days, usually to Galveston Island now is where I've kind of settled. And I will, in that span of time, I'll write like 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 pages in a big burst. Okay. And what I find is that when I'm there and I'm not interrupted and it's just me alone with my little imaginary friends, I can actually get a lot done, because I just wake up in the morning, make a pot of coffee, sit down on the sofa, start typing. And the next thing I know, it's dark outside and I've written many, many pages. And then I come home and I don't really think about it. I sort of let it drain. I give it some time to settle. And then I come back to it 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and I reread everything that I did with like fresh eyes. And then I dive back in and do another chunk. So I really do it in chunks.
And so like each time, are you going away then when you're going back to the book? And so you're giving yourself, so it's like periods of time away, and then you come back home for a big chunk, and then you go away for a little chunk. And okay.
Yeah. And for me, that really works, because I've found that if I try to go too fast about making plot choices, because there's that question of like, are you a pantser who writes by the seat of their pants, or a plotter who plots everything on advance? I'm like half and half. I'm like a pantser who wants to be a plotter. I love the idea of knowing where I'm going in advance, but so much of where the story is going has to grow out of what just happened, right? So I try to kind of envision it, but I also have to be in the moment and follow whatever's happening. So yeah, I find if I push too hard, too fast, make too many decisions too quickly, then it's me pushing instead of me following the story. So I find that downtime really lets it settle. In the back of my head, it's still churning back there, but I'm home and like making dinner and doing normal stuff. But then when I go back, it's had time to kind of marinate, and then it comes to me what the next thing is. So yeah, it's a good system. And then once I've got that first draft, which is always the hardest part for me, like I'm always so nervous that I'm going to take a wrong turn, or, Same, and I never, and it's like, you never really know if that magic is going to be there until it's there, right? You think it is, you hope it is, you want it to be, but until that fire lights up, you can't guarantee that that's going to happen. So I'm always very relieved when I've got that first draft and I know it's good. And then I turn it into my editor and it's like 3 more months of messing around with it. So she'll give me feedback and it's generally pretty broad. It's like, I loved this character. I'd love to see more of her, or I didn't understand why this character made this choice. Can you make that more clear? That kind of stuff. And then we go through copy edits and all that stuff. And then that takes a full year. And then the next thing that happens is it goes into production. And then once it's in production, that's a whole nother year. It's a lot of delayed gratification where they're like working out the, what are they working out? The like marketing and the publicity and all the sort of other stuff. And we're doing copy edits at the same time. So yeah, it's a lot of multitasking, which is
it is. Yeah. And I just want to say real quick for anyone who's listening or watching, if they want to know about the production timeline, I have a really detailed post at creativeinspiredhappy.com, which goes through like how many months it takes. It's exactly what you just said, like, like 2 years basically in traditional publishing. So check that out if you're curious. So for you, I want to know, when do you do publicity? And because, if you have books that are one on top of each other, you're basically doing publicity for, like right now, the love haters, but you are presumably starting to think about and write the next book.
Yes, it's all layered on top of itself. But I think that's actually another reason why the going away, coming back sort of rhythm really works for me, because I'm kind of just a one thing at a time kind of person. So I like to write for 5 days and then I come home and I'll update my website, or I'll do a giveaway on Instagram, or like I'll find something else to do that needs to be done that's more like real work, like frontal lobe kind of work. And then taking time out to go just relax and be creative and sort of swim around in my own imagination. I think separating those two things out actually makes it easier to do both. So yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, how do you walk away from a story, or like not walk away from, but, be like, okay, I'm done with this and I need to move on to another set of, issues and characters. And actually, Effie has one more question for you. And she wanted to know, which characters have you missed the most, like once you've been done with a story? And I know it's so hard to choose because they're all yours.
I do miss them, but I also kind of carry them with me in this funny way. And they very much feel like real people to me once they've come into existence. Like, I can't imagine a world that doesn't have Jack Stapleton in it. Like, that doesn't seem like that is even possible,
Right?
I really, really love these characters in the Love Haters. I think Hutch is just about the dreamiest, most heroic rescue swimmer of a man that I think anybody could imagine. I was also very fond of the characters in the rom-commers because they, Emma in the rom-commers is a writer. They're both writers. And I had never written about writers before. And to be a writer and write about writers, I actually thought that was against the rules for a while. And then I changed my mind and I was like, I could probably do this. But I love them. I get them, those writers. Like, I really understand. I don't really know what it's like to be a rescue swimmer, but I very much know what it's like to be a writer. So I do feel very connected to them, but I love them all. I just carry them around with me.
I know. I totally understand that as well. What is the most surprising thing that's happened to you in your career that maybe you didn't expect? Which I guess is the definition of a surprising thing.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I would say that when I was younger, I thought success was a thing that when it happened to you, it had to happen overnight, or that it had to happen in a kind of recognizable burst. And, I saw this happen to some people I knew early on. They would like have a TED Talk and then suddenly, become world famous. Mm-hmm. And I guess I thought that was how it happened. And my career has actually been the opposite of that. I'm the opposite of an overnight success. My career has been just showing up every day, in whatever way that day needed me to show up for my job, and getting slowly better at writing, learning more, every week about how to create a story that would matter to people and be page turning and emotionally resonant. and kind of slowly finding the people who would like the particular thing that I do. Because I think that the stories that I write are, they don't fit easily into one sort of simple genre or category, if that makes sense. So like I think of them as like sort of half women's fiction and half romance or love story or rom-com. The women's fiction part is there's always hard things that happen to the characters. They always have to struggle with difficulty in some way. And that's, to me, that's where wisdom comes from, like the hard things that we have to go through and learn how to make sense of. So I like that. I love wisdom. I'm a huge fan of wisdom. And I love reading stories where people figure out what really matters to them and who they want to be in the face of all the hardship and tragedy of life. So I love that stuff. I love the poetry of it and the sort of beauty and the way that stories can kind of crystallize all this meaning for us out of the chaos of real life. But I also want them to be fun, you know, and I really would like for someone in the story to take their shirt off at some point, you know, like I love the love story part. That's the banter. That's the play. That's the, I mean, there's actually a psychology term for this. It's called positively valenced anticipation. And it's like, in a romance story, you know you're going to get a happily ever after at the end. That's a guarantee of the genre. And so what that kind of allows your sort of tired heart to do is kind of relax and feel sort of safe and comforted. Like no matter how bad things are in the middle of the story, like even if, you know, the two leads have been thrown into a snake pit by pirates, by the end, we're going to be okay, right? It's this guarantee. And so, I love that feeling. I love that sort of safe feeling. I'm actually more willing to look at hard things when it's bookmarked by the fact that we're all going to be okay in the end. So, yeah, I don't even remember the question now. Suddenly,
no, you did fantastic. I think maybe
I know you were asking what surprised me. That has surprised me. It like I'm surprised that that the way that I did it, because my first book came out in 2007, so it's really like not that far from 20 years ago. The very, very slow, meandering, uncertain way that I slowly built a career that never ever had like a really like a watershed moment was the better way. I think that was surprising. That was a surprising thing to learn. It was better to go slow because it allowed me to figure out who I am, what my purpose is, why I'm here, why I'm even writing these stories at all. There were many, many years when I kept thinking I was going to have to quit because I just could not get over what I thought was some kind of, you know, critical hump. And I did a panel at a book thing last year where there were a whole bunch of authors, like big name authors up on this panel. And the moderator asked us if we had, what's that thing? Imposter syndrome. And as they're going, you know, I'm the last person on the row. And as they're going down author after author, they're all saying yes. And they got to me and I was like, no, like I know why I'm here. And I know what I'm trying to do for all of us, myself included, but anybody else who wants to come along. And I've had many, many years to really practice and to feel confident that if that's the thing that you like, I can do that for you. I mean, I can't do your taxes, but I can write you a love story.
Okay, this is the perfect way to end the episode. What do you want readers to take away from The Love Haters?
Oh, man. You know, when I'm writing, I'm always thinking about how the story I'm writing is going to make people feel. That's like my guiding light. And I would like to make people feel everything with this story. You know, I want them to be laugh and cry books. I want there to be struggle and frustration and people who drive you crazy. But I also want there to be laughter and play and goofiness and hope and excitement. So I want the good and the bad. I think the hard parts of the story help create the stakes for the fun parts of the story. And so I need to have both. I do want you to get a little misty eyed when you're reading. And that's because I, as a reader, when I'm reading a story, if I'm not moved, if I don't get my heart broken a little bit, I'm always a little disappointed. So I try to break your heart a little bit, but that's, that's how the cracks are how the love gets in, right? We all walk around, armored up all the time. And I think a love story has to kind of crack you open a little bit so your heart can really feel it when you get to the good stuff at the end. So yeah, I think it's a story about people who have to kind of confront a lot of their worst fears and kind of figure out how to cope with those things and how to be the best versions of themselves in the face of all of that. And I hope that that helps people feel hopeful and inspired and satisfied and, kind of ready to turn back around and look at their own real lives with like different eyes, with kinder eyes, hopefully. So yeah, that's kind of what I hope for.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'm so excited for everyone to pick up this book. The Love Haters is out now. Thank you, Katherine, so much for being on the show. This was really fun. I mean, I could hang out with you for hours and hours and hours, but unfortunately, you've got work to do. So
real life gets in the way.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.